Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. If you recall, we had started a discussion on attitudes, and in that session, we had also tried to link up attitudes with the learning process and the discussion that we had on perception. The goal was to try and find out as to how perceptions are built through the learning process and how they affect the attitudes. And the logic that we had given at that point of time in trying to study attitudes is that attitudes has a direct relationship, a very direct relationship with actual purchase behavior. So what we were trying to say is that if you have a positive attitude, then the likelihood of your buying a product which you have a positive attitude for is more. But perceptions, when we discussed a lot of theoretical frames and models there, we were trying to suggest that perceptions create these attitudes. And then we had gone through the process of learning to suggest how learning takes place and how perceptions are created. And obviously, the end goal was to look at how attitudes come to be formed. The important thing that marketers require to understand is that first of all, because let's be very honest, that attitude cannot be seen. What we normally see is the end of the attitude, and that is the actual behavior in terms of buying or whatever is the relationship. What we try and do is, what we try and make understandable about this whole thing is that attitudes lead to behavior and we can only infer. That means हम समझ सकते हैं कि attitude क्या है by looking at the actual performance. But attitude cannot be seen. However, there are methods by which we can measure attitudes from three different points of view. And we had started discussion on one of the models, and that was the tri-component model, where we had cognitive, we had affective, and cognitive components of that model. And we thought we should be able to check each one to try and understand how does a person has an attitude towards a particular object. But before we go into that, let's recapitulate what is attitude. And we said that it is a kind of a relatively enduring evaluation of an object, a person, or an action. And that is only inferred from the action itself. Now, this is what was very, very critical. And in further deciding on developing on the concept of attitude, we had discussed the various elements, but the main important component of this whole attitude frame is that it is object oriented. Attitudes are always relative to a particular object, a particular person, a particular situation, and cannot be generalized to everything. If I have a positive attitude towards a particular, let's say a watch, a Seiko watch, or my attitude towards Rolex watch, then the attitude will be related to that particular product or brand or an object. Or it could be related to a particular person. It cannot be generalized to everybody, because I would have an attitude, different attitude toward different people. Therefore, when I look at my attitude, it has to be object oriented. Now, basically what is attitude is that it is a combination of a number of factors, which includes motivation, personality, emotion, perceptions, and all these processes get together, and at a point of time, in some form, they result in a particular attitude towards a particular object. And we will always use the word object, particularly when we are doing this discussion. And the object would typically mean a brand, because when we are in marketing, our full conceptualization would be related towards brands and product, because logic mein, product is basically a brand now. There is nothing like a product. It is basically now we have all branded stuff. So we always connote the object as a brand. So in our discussion in this area, we will constantly look at the brand concept. Now, what we did talk about was that attitudes are learned processes. And the word is enduring. Therefore, it means that they stay for a long period of time. However, because they stay for a long period of time, that does not mean by any standard that they are permanent. What it basically means is that they are very difficult to change, but change can be made. And in the last discussion, if you recall, I remember telling you that marketers have to first understand what the attitude of a particular segment or a particular a group of people is towards a particular brand or product before they can influence or bring change in it. Now, at that point of time, it could be possible that there is a positioning that was done. And again, the significance of the positioning concept becomes very evident here, that if you positioned a product wrongly, and positioning is done obviously through the media, if you have done it wrongly, you could have created a wrong attitude towards that brand or product. Now, if we understand or we find that there is a negative attitude, then the logic is that negative attitude must first be neutralized by some form, and we will discuss this in the process of change, and then from that to take it to a positive attitude with the belief and hope that if we have developed a positive attitude towards our product, and if the customers start having a positive attitude toward our brand, then the likelihood that that brand will be bought will go significantly higher. However, we also suggested that every time a person buys does not really mean that he has a positive attitude toward the product. And an example I gave you was that if I was buying a regular brand and that depicted my positive attitude towards it, but at a given moment of time, for maybe the reason that I did not have enough money in my pocket at the point of time to buy that brand, so I bought whatever was available, and whatever was available to me for the money that I had, so I buy that brand, does not mean my attitude towards the old brand has changed. It just suggests that the situation had influenced me to bring this change into position. Now, these are the three more important frameworks on which we will start our discussion. The first is that it is a learned process. We learn it. Second, it is enduring, but it can be changed, and marketers look forward to bringing changes in the people's attitude. And finally, that these are situational, where situations do have an impact on the attitudes. Now, we need to understand where the attitudes and what is the importance of it. Obviously, there are certain strategic questions that marketers need to ask themselves regarding when they launch a new product or a new brand, and whether to target a particular customer group or whether to have a particular ad which is placed in the market. What will be the response coming in from that side? Because we know that these advertisements normally have a very strong impact on creating influences, and we have talked about it during the learning process. Observations, media impact, all are these related, and they are tending and they are aimed at bringing change or creating favorable attitudes toward the product. So the basic concept that we were interested in is that the marketer needs to first identify what is the current attitude of the market or the segment, and second, to be able to try and modify these attitudes, which is very critical. Now, within this frame, we had started discussing the first model, which was based on three components. That is why it's called tri-component model. The three components were affective, the second was cognitive, and the third was conative. Now, cognitive, as we had been discussing regularly, is basically the thinking process or the method in which information is analyzed and interpreted. So the first factor, therefore, comes into position is that attitudes are formed because people tend to go through a thinking process and they evaluate the information. Normally, it is related to the attributes. And we talked about involvement, and we said those people who have high involvement have a high cognition requirement. That means they tend to have more demand for information. So if I wanted to create a favorable attitude towards my brand, then for that segment which is more into cognition, I would give them more content, more attribute information, more comparative information so that we can generate a positive attitude towards our brand. And the points that we would target in that category would be the ones that we believe would have a favorable impact on the consumer's mind. The second is what we call affective. Now, affective is basically feelings. Another way of measuring the attitude is to try and assess what kind of feeling does my brand create in the mind of a consumer. If the feelings are positive, if the emotions are happy, if the mood is more positive, it will have a better attitude impact on the product or brand. The final one is to measure this attitude area, we can see the cognitive framework. And the cognitive framework basically means it is normative, which means my action, my behavior will suggest what is my attitude. And we had talked about three particular aspects of behavior. One is my future prediction, whether I will buy or not. Second was whether I will, provide this positive word of mouth to the other people. Would I recommend it to my friends, my family members? And all these will suggest that I have a particular attitude. Because if I was to tell people not to go to a particular shop or a restaurant, it would suggest that I have a negative attitude on it. And one way that we can measure this attitude is by asking questions which are relevant. Now, I'll show you the model, which is basically a component, three components in it. And then we will take up each one and look at certain measuring questions. That means I will show you certain questions that may be asked in each category to be able to help understand the attitude framework. There are a number of frameworks that are available, number of questionnaires, number of instruments are available, but I have picked up only a few, and they are related to specific products. As I said, that each aspect of this must be related to a specific product, and it cannot be done otherwise. So let me start with the product model. It shows you three components which are equally distributed. The first component is cognitive, the second is affective, and the third is cognitive. Now, we have already talked about the relationship between this, but let me go a little further. And I was talking to you about cognition, which I was talking about the thought process and the thinking area. Therefore, the importance of this model is very specific. The first part, which is the cognition part, actually guides our thoughts. Why? Because all the information that we receive helps us develop a thought process, which will obviously have an impact on our attitude. The second part of the model is what influences our feelings. Therefore, if I can measure our feelings, I can measure attitude, and that component is the affective component. The final one is that we suggest that there is an impact on behavior, and that behavior is what we call the cognitive component. And the cognitive component means basically how we will behave or how we will react to a particular object or a particular person or a situation. And that component is what will be, we can measure that component to be able to judge our attitude towards the product or the object. Now, as we go along, I will be showing you a certain sets of questions, which are asked in each category area. Now, the first set is cognition, where we would be informing you as to how knowledge is perceived and how we acquire this information through the word of mouth, through experience, through reading material, and that helps us form our belief. Now, here is question and a very small set of questions that I have picked up from a questionnaire that was related to Old Spice. If you recall, Old Spice is an aftershave lotion, and the marketers of Old Spice were trying to find out what was the response to their product as such. And watch, it was nothing to do with feelings. It has nothing to do with the purchase behavior or the future forecasting of behavior. It is basically related to the product attribute. Now, these product attributes that were chosen to be assessed are those that are considered significant in terms of an aftershave lotion. Now, for example, there is a question, aftershave lotion normally gives you a feeling of freshness. It is supposed to be pleasant. It could also be something that the smell appeals to other people. Obviously, we're talking about the fragrance, so it appeals to other people. Now, if I was to put this on a range of, let's say, refreshing and not refreshing, pleasant, not pleasant, or appealing to others and unappealing to others, and I asked a simple questions broken on a Likert scale, which means divided into, let's say, 5 categories, where the first category is strongly agree with it, and the not refreshing is where I say I do not agree that it is refreshing, and I can ask a question along a sequence where 1 stands more refreshing and 5 stands not refreshing. Given this questionnaire, I should be able to very easily understand what is the attitude of the consumer regarding the product, and in this case, it is Old Spice. Now, the same product is also being used, and I will use the same product to also show you the affective component, measuring the affective component, that is measuring the feelings about the product itself. And you can see the difference between the type of questions that are asked. Now, if you look at the screen again, you will find that the affective components can be seen on Likert scale again. You know, it's talking about the feeling. The feeling is, once you put the lotion on your face, could it be that your face feels tight? Or could it feel smooth? Could it feel clean? And so on and so forth. So now questioning the feelings that the consumer has towards the product or the brand. And again, the difference between the two is very clear. Here I'm talking about how I feel towards the brand. There I was asking regarding the product itself. So these are the 2 factors. Now, the logic says that if I feel more, relaxed, more smooth, more clean, more refreshed, then my attitude will tend to be more positive as against the other side, which will create more negativeness in it. And obviously, if all these factors are more positive, then I can conclude that the person will have a positive attitude, and the likelihood of this positive attitude will result in a particular purchase behavior. And the likelihood is that people will tend to buy this product. So here are the 2 components that I have mentioned. Now, the third component, which is basically the component of conation, and what we talk about the conation is that it suggests how would I behave in the future. My future behavior could be asked by the question of, do I intend to buy the product in, let's say, a week's time, 2 weeks' time, a month's time? Second method of assessing this is by asking, would I prescribe this product to my friend? Would I recommend this product to my friends? If I do, again, it suggests that I would have a positive attitude. And remember, at the beginning of this session, I told you that we need to measure attitudes. The logic is that by measuring attitudes and understanding the attitudes towards the product itself, we should be able to assess the likelihood of the person's purchase behavior. But remember again that there is no confirmed situation where I can come around and say that if there is a positive attitude, the purchase behavior will take place. And before I show you the conative questionnaire, a simple example is that maybe I have a very positive attitude towards a Rolex watch, but I could have a negative perception of my ability to buy that watch. Now, given this, it does not really, like I said, it does not really mean that if I have a positive attitude, I will always buy. Similarly, it is also not logical that if I buy something, it assumes that I have a positive attitude towards it, or that I have a negative attitude toward the product that I used to buy. These things have to be kept in mind. But what it does suggest through research is that there is more likelihood, more probability that there is a positive attitude will result in a positive purchase behavior. Now, coming back to the questionnaire on conative frameworks, where we were trying to measure connection through asking questions about our logically future behavior in purchase, or in case of my recommendations or the recommendation of the consumer to other people. Here is the questionnaire, and we can see that it tends to show the likelihood or tendency to buy or behave. Not that there will be confirmation that you will definitely buy, but it will show a tendency. It will also have buy scales, which we have already suggested. Now you can see that in terms of Old Spice, we have I will definitely buy, I probably will buy it, I am uncertain whether I will buy it or not, I probably will not buy, I definitely will not buy. Now, this kind of a buying scale is logically suggestive of how I will be able to predict my future behavior, and my attitude is reflected in these scales. Similarly, the question like very likely, likely, not likely, definitely not going to buy are all scales that will help us predict a particular attitude of the consumer towards the product. Now, what we are interested, what is the importance of this? That we can change the attitudes choosing any one of the three frames. For example, if we were into bringing about change through cognition, then we need to give information that will significantly change the knowledge frame of the consumer. And we believe that that particular aspect of knowledge, which does not exist beforehand in the mind of the consumer, would be sufficient to bring change in the person's behavior. And in this, we need to look at 4 specific aspects of cognition, and we can use any one of them to shift the attitude from the negative to the positive or the positive to the negative. Now, these 4 are change the belief itself, or you can shift the importance of a particular attribute that at a point of time is more significant for consumers, and you may be able to, through your information or through giving more facts and figures, you might shift the frame of importance from away from the competitor towards your own brand. Or perhaps you can add a new belief into the product or the brand, which will reinforce or strengthen your brand against a competitor's product. Or you may even go to the extent of changing the ideal situation. Now, I will try and give examples in each one. For the first thing that we were talking about, a change in belief. And I'll give you an example how these beliefs have an effect on attitudes and then purchase behavior. At a point of time, long time back, people used to believe that pure ghee and pure butter is good for health. And that was very common in all the villages, and even in the cities. Let's say in the 60s, it was considered that anything pure, ghee, butter, is good for health. However, then research was undertaken, and without looking at the other aspects, people started saying that no, oil, which is like vegetable oil, is better in terms of, let's say, canola, olive oil, palm oil, rapeseed oil, so on and so forth. So this kind of information flow, which is again cognitive, brought about a change in the people's perception and led to attitudes against ghee and butter and in favor of oils. Now, this has been going on, and that is how a lot of people have shifted from eating pure butter, pure ghee, towards these vegetable oils. But now research is coming in, which is suggestive that not all oils are good, really, and it could be possible that pure butter and ghee are better. Now, on the other side, there is this concept where we can say, we have seen that on the screen as add a belief. Now, let's say that there is a product, let's say a paper towel, which is normally used, or a kitchen towel, which is normally used in the kitchens. We have, and it's supposed to be used for cleaning surfaces, drying hands and everything. Now, a person may add a belief that it is better to have a paper towel which is also sanitized, which means that if you use it, it will also kill germs and kill all bacteria that may be on the surface or on your hands. Now, this is adding a belief. And obviously, if you add this kind of a belief and you also project that within the same benefit of cleaning, you can also get sanitation, that is hygienically cleaned and bacteria killing frameworks, then the logic would be that we will create a positive attitude toward this product or brand. And obviously, this has to be my product or brand, and I want to differentiate myself from the normal, ordinary paper cleaners or paper towels. And by bringing this new additional belief in terms of how a product should be considered, I will be able to add a positive attitude towards my product. In the same case, we can have change the ideals. Now, this is very common. You might have seen an ad over a period of time being shown on the television on Indian channels as well as in Pakistan, where the UPS is running for the purposes of obviously electricity failures. And in that, there is a battery which actually is acid battery. And acid batteries normally bring out fumes. So even if the acid battery is strong in terms of supporting the UPS systems, a person might suggest to you that it would be better if you have a totally sealed battery for the same purpose. Now, why? Because the ideal is being changed from just pure support system to the UPS, but also to protect harmful emissions that may come out of an acid battery. And you can see that certain people have tried to enter this UPS market against old competitors by bringing this new ideal into position, that a product which is going to be used inside a house, not related to the car, but inside a house where fumes, acid fumes might be damaging to the household. So you have now changed a criteria or an ideal from whatever was existing to a higher level or a different level, where you suggest that within the house, an old sealed battery, a wholly sealed battery might be very logical. Now, obviously, these things that we are discussing is basically to understand how attitudes are formed and how attitudes can be changed using certain frameworks. And we just discussed a very clear framework on cognition. Now we will go into the second model that I talked about, and that was multi-attribute model, which means there are more than 3 components to that model. And we will look at the first one is attitude towards the object model. Now, please remember that where research has been able to develop certain models, they normally tend to share common frameworks. So where these common frameworks are, I will avoid repeating them. So I will just put you towards the one that we had already studied, and we can see a relationship there, and go into a model which is new to us. So in this multi-attribute model, we have 3 types: the attitude towards the object model, the attitude towards the behavior model, and finally, the theory of reasoned action model. Now, the third one is the new one, because attitude toward the object model is more related to the cognition model that we have already discussed in the tri-attribute model, where cognition is the one which suggests your approach or attitude towards the product. And I've already given you an example. I'll give you some more questionnaires to measure this particular aspect, because all these measures are actually required to measure attitudes. And that is what is very critical for us as marketers. The second one, attitude towards the behavioral model, is what we've already discussed in terms of the cognitive framework, where we tend to suggest how will we behave or how will we act towards the product, whether passing positive word of mouth or buying into the future. So the third model is more critical, and we will look at it because it's a new model. We will look at it as a reasoned action model. Now, just the words, if you focus on the words, it means that our attitude does not come about by reading material or by having certain feelings, but it is more than that, and that means that it has a component of some kind of a reasoning framework. Before we go into the model, let's quickly get over this other 2 frameworks, which is basically the attitude towards the object and attitude towards the behavior. Look at the questionnaires And once we have gone over it, we can come to the framework of the model, which is the reasoned action model. In this, if you look at the screen, you will be able to see, this time it is the question regarding Diet Coke, and the cognition is towards the object itself. For example, we can see that it could be related to two frameworks, and this is what we call semantic differential, where two words have two strong endpoints, like a strong taste or a mild taste. So there are two extremes, and we can ask the question regarding the product in terms of the continuum of it. It could be also like low priced, high price, caffeine free, high caffeine, distinctive taste, or similar taste with the other products. By keeping these two things in position, we have been able to now get this. Basically is what we talked about in the initial stage of cognitive framework. On the second side, let's look at basically an affective model, and this one is for children, because it is very difficult to research the children's attitudes towards product, and it relates to Kellogg's cereals. And if you look at it again, it's a very simple framework. It says, I like it, and it is about the feelings towards the particular framework, towards the particular product. It says, I like it, Kellogg is fun, Kellogg is great, Kellogg is useful, it is handy, and Kellogg is useless. Now, I've just added this last point to make sure you understand that in research, what we tend to do is that we put questions and then we have a negative question on it. The reason is to understand whether the person who is filling it is filling it with understanding and not just ticking points out. Finally, we look at the behavioral frame, which I talked to you before we move towards the final model. And if you will look at it, the question is about the Diet Coke, and it suggests that I will buy it, whether I will buy it next time, buy it in about a month after or whatever. So we are looking at behavioral frameworks. Now, after this, we are now coming into the attitude towards behavior model, which has basically these following components. But let me first explain how this model came about and what was the significance of this model. The model was based on a study which tried to assess the consumer's behavior or consumer's attitude towards online shopping. Online shopping is when you use your credit cards to purchase on the internet. Now, there were a major attributes that were discovered. There were a number of variables that were figured out. And based on these collective variables, the person or the model was determined to have 4 distinct frameworks which have an impact on the attitude towards online shopping. Now, given this, the conclusion was drawn, or it was again assessed, that if you had a positive attitude, what will be the frequency of online shopping? Therefore, the shopping rate was determined. So this model came to be a fully integrative model based on 3 components. One is the area where attitude was being developed or influenced through cognition, through certain personality behaviors, so many other factors, which created the second middle component, as you can see, was the attitude towards online shopping. If it was positive, it reflected in the rate of online shopping. 4 frameworks that is critical in this model is that online shopping depended, and remember this model relates to online shopping. So if you wanted to use this model for the purposes of some other product, then you have to be very specific in putting questionnaires which will guide you through this process of these 4 categories. Now, first of all, it was demographics. It was found that younger people, more knowledgeable about technology, were more inclined to have a positive attitude towards online shopping. And obviously, in their case, online shopping rate was higher than those people who were from the older generation and who were not so technologically savvy, or what we say, जिनको टेक्नोलॉजी का इतना इल्म नहीं, उनके लिए ऑनलाइन शॉपिंग के जो एटीट्यूड थे वो इतने पॉजिटिव नहीं थे, एंड इसीलिए when we looked at their usage rate, it was pretty low. Now, the second component is the purchase preference. Again, it was found this behavioral model that was developed is based on a kind of reasoning or thought process, and therefore, before we actually look at the reason action model, we can understand from here how the reason action model comes about. But at this point, when we are discussing this behavioral model, we are looking at the purchase preference. Now, it is very simple to understand that if there is a product that you need to go and touch or feel or see for yourself, then obviously you will not like to buy it online, and no marketer would like to sell that kind of product online. However, if the product is something that needs not to be touched, only you need to know that it is there, for example, like a book, then it becomes more sensible to buy it online. And Amazon has capitalized on this particular area very significantly. But on the other hand, if you are selling cloth, then it would not seem to be logical to have the product displayed on an online shopping system, where particularly when women would like to go and touch and feel. Now again, therefore, behavior reflects this framework of a person's thought process or his attitude or behavior. The third factor is the benefit factor in it. Now again, it is very logical that if the benefit can only be, or can be, one of the benefits is that if I have to waste my time trying to search the market and find where the thing is located, I can go to the computer, go to the internet, and actually locate myself wherever the product is found. You can see that most of the times when you are trying to travel out and you want to book a hotel room, it becomes more sensible to be able to book online, because you know, but you can even see the kind of hotels, the prices, the room rates, the time that the rooms are available, rather than, and this all is benefit, because rather than calling everywhere and trying to find out where the room is available or not, this makes it very convenient that you can have a particular benefit out of it and you can buy online. And that is what PIA and most of the airlines have started doing, that they have started making their tickets available online. Finally, we have the lifestyle issue. Now, again, lifestyles have a very strong relationship with online purchase behavior. So, and the same thing is reflected in the attitudes. If you travel quite a lot and your lifestyle relates to a large traveling that you do, a number of times you travel out, then you tend to use the computer more often, because it is easy to find locations and places, as I gave you the example in terms of benefit. So all these things put together gives you a particular model, where it is a behavioral model, obviously, that we were discussing, but has a direct link with the reasoned action model, which is a theory behind why people would tend to do that. And if you remember my example of hotels and my example of book and my example of the attitude towards technology, you will be able to understand the reasoning framework, which we will now discuss. The theory of reasoned action model, which I will display now, suggests that there are two different aspects to developing an attitude. The first aspect is cognitive aspect, which obviously relates to how I look at the outcomes, how I look at the attributes and the benefits that will come because of a purchase behavior. And obviously that suggests the outcomes is based on the attitudes. The second component, which is very important, is the social component, or what you call the subjective component. Now, this subjective component suggests that our attitudes do not only form because there are certain benefits that will accrue to us, or there are certain things that we understand and we acknowledge in our mind through the experience, through reading material, through creating knowledge, but also has to be seen by what we understand would be the reaction of other people against us, or against the attitude, or against the behavior. Now, in this particular case, it is very significant, and if we recall the theories that we had discussed when we were talking about influence, consumer behavior पे जो influence है, तो वहाँ family, friends का influence बहुत significant है. That is why in the theory of reasoned action model, which actually is trying to now use the same concepts to identify how attitudes are formed, we come to the conclusion that basically what we understand, how people will react to us, also has an impact on the attitude that we form, which obviously finally leads to behavior. So we have two basic components that we are interested in. One is attitude towards the behavior itself, and the other is the subjective framework. Now, if you look at the model, you can easily see how these are related to each other. Now, in the first case, attitude to the behavior, we have already discussed the belief about the behavior and outcome. In the case of the online shopping system, we obviously, given this, we have a very positive attitude. Therefore, it is considered to be something that will take us into the high online rate. If we bring the component of the second subjective norm, this component therefore would suggest that that earlier attitude could be changeable or could be influenced. For example, if there is a person who is maybe young, who is always looking at stuff on the internet, buying on the internet. Now, if his friends or even if his family or his parents start having an objection to his going over on the online and buying these, it could bring an attitude. Okay, if he is found on the computer every time, the impact or his parents' response to his sitting on the internet might be negative, and he might take that particular thing into consideration and may amend his attitude towards the online shopping, as I've explained in the earlier stage. Now, looking at the model again, if you take another look, you will find that there are two aspects of the subjective component. Now, subjective component number one is the belief that is about what other people or what we have said the reference would have about the attitude or the action and intention of behavior. The second component, which is more significant perhaps, is your personal motivation to comply with the aspect of the reference, the specific people who you think have an attitude or would have an opinion towards your behavior. Remember that this is reasoned action model, so we are talking about the intention or the behavior of the people based on certain sets of reasoning. Now, for example, let's say there is a contradiction. The father or the parent wants the son to have his hair cut, and let's say the son is trying to figure out whether he should keep his hair short or maybe keep them long. The parents want the hair of the child to be short, to be cut, but his friends, he believes that his friends would look positively on him if he has long hair, because it reflects more modernistic attitude. So now he has a conflict. Now, the decision or the final conclusion whether he will have a haircut or not will depend on his motivation to comply with either of the two sets of different opinions. Whether his father's or his parents' influence is stronger and he would like to please his parents more, or on the other hand, would he like to please his friends more, will lead to the final conclusion as to how he has, how will he behave in the final stage. Would he cut his hair or not will totally depend on these two frameworks. And that is why this model is very significant to help us in understanding attitudes and how they form. And the logic is that if we can understand within the segment whether the children are more influenced by the parents or more influenced by the friends, then the logical way to approach this particular segment would be to influence the parents and develop their attitudes so that that can have an impact on the segment that we are interested. Or if we know that friends are more logical in trying to influence the person's attitude, then we might approach the ad in shape of friends convincing the person to be able to do a particular thing, buy a particular product or whatever. Now, this is where the implications of these models come into position. Before I go into how attitudes are formed, and that is if time will allow me, I would like to finish with the two final models that we were talking about. One is the theory of trying to consume, and the second is the attitude toward the ad model. Now, theory of trying to consume is not that critical in our case. It just tries to suggest whether my behavior is reflective of my attempt to consume a product, to attempt to buy a particular product, attempt to buy a particular service. Therefore, in the number of times I try, suggests that I have a positive attitude towards the product. So I will not go into the details of it, but I will look at the attitude towards the ad model. Now, we try and we've already understood in terms of perceptions when we were talking about it, and in terms of learning theory, that advertisements, whether they are media, terms of written print media or visual media, has a definite impact on the consumers and the way they will behave. And the form of behavior that is the outcome can only be because a positive attitude has been created by the ad. And it is this that we need to study. Therefore, when we look at particular ads, we have to be able to even judge whether the ad is creating a positive attitude or a negative attitude. I'll just give you an example here. There was a company which had created an ad which they were going to spend about $7 million in launching in the market. But before they went to launch the ad in the market, somebody in the company suggested that let's have an evaluation done or a research done to check what kind of an attitude or what kind of a response would be triggered by this particular ad in the market. So before they went into a major launch of that ad, they approached the marketing company. Burke Marketing is a research company in America, to assess whether this would generate positive or negative or neutral attitudes. And after the research was undertaken, this advertisement was shut down. Why? Because it was suggested by research that it will not create a positive attitude in the minds of the consumer or the segment that they were targeting in. And that saved the company a lot of money, particularly in terms of, obviously, they had gone into the advertisement, they had launched it, they would have spent the money, and they would have found out that instead of creating a positive attitude, the ad has created a negative attitude, which would have costed a lot of money. And therefore, the company tried to reposition their product and bring a new ad into position. We have now concluded the models, basically. Before I go into the attitude formation theory, which I think because of the time constraint that I have now, it's about 2 or 3 minutes, I would take up the attitude formation subsequently, where we will try and understand how attitudes are learned, because if we understand that, how attitudes are learned, then that is what we can influence. Obviously, we have already talked about sources of influence, so we will be using those sources of influence on people's attitudes and use them to bring change in the attitude. And then we will also look at the concept of personality, how they affect or impact the attitude formation. Now, to recapitulate or conclude on the lecture today, we have been discussing a number of models. We have already understood that models are what helps people or marketers to formulate their strategies. In this case, we were more concerned about the attitude and its impact on behavior, because we said that there is a direct positive link. If you have a positive attitude, more likelihood to buy. But it is also not necessary that if you have a positive attitude, you can buy, because situations may bring about changes. But then the whole concept of marketing and developing positioning strategies and positioning the product relates to how people will be able to perceive or how people will be able to react to a positioning strategy. Therefore, we need to measure their attitudes. Now, we can measure the attitude towards a competitive product. We can measure the attitude towards our own brand. And then from that, we should be able to have a clear picture as to how we should be able to position our own product. And if you recall, I had given you an example of Coca-Cola when they had to change back their product and positioning to their own classic Coke. Now, we have talked about how to measure, and broadly, in more or less all these models, which have been arranged in different forms, we have seen that there are 3 major components. The first one is the cognitive component. That means how I respond to a particular object. Second is the affective, where I have feelings towards the objective or the object. And finally, the behavioral component, where I can suggest or buy or intend to buy that particular product. Now, this brings us to the conclusion of the lecture. I will pick up the attitude formation in the next one, and then we will continue for therein. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.